Well, here we are again. Welcome, everyone, to another Irish Breakdown podcast. I'm Vince D'Addario. I'm the football analyst here at irishbreakdown.com. And with me today is Ryan Roberts, our director of recruiting at Irish Breakdown. And we are going to talk a little NFL combine action with a Notre Dame slant to it. Five players that are headed into the draft were invited to the NFL combine in Indianapolis. Starting March 1st, yes?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's not accurate? Okay. So starting March 1st, and we're going to go through. We're going to go offense first. We'll go defense. We're going to talk about just the various, things that these guys need to do, what teams are looking for, where you think they are slotted right now, all of that fun stuff. We're going to pick the brain of Ryan because he is the NFL draft expert, and that's what we do here. We have experts. So Ryan, first of all, how are you doing today?
Mm-hmm. Good, man. Good. It's, it was fun yesterday. Brian called me. He was like, you want to write an NFL draft piece? I'm like, yes. That's an easy one for me. But, yeah, man, this is a fun time. We're past all-star games for the draft cycle. And now we just have to look to see how athletic these guys are. So it should be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. So let's just jump right in. Offense first. So speaking of the all-star games and such, we know that Jack Coan was at the East-West Shrine game. Is that what they still call it?
Yeah, East-West Shrine Bowl now. It's not game anymore, apparently. But yeah,
okay,
out in Vegas though, so they're living it up out there.
Yeah, they were at that beautiful stadium that they got going on there. Which, by the way, fired up to go out there next year when they play BYU. Just saying. But let's talk Jack Coan. Let's start off with where you see him now. Going into the draft, and then we'll talk about what he can do to kind of improve where he's at. Because I think he's already, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think he's already kind of improved his stock with going to the Shrine Bowl.
Yeah, no, he ended the year off obviously down the stretch in a really good fashion, right? Like he had played his best football for Notre Dame, and he parlayed that into an East-West Shrine invite. I know there was actually a little jockeying back and forth. The NFLPA Bowl also that plays out in Pasadena was also sent him out an invite. So he was originally maybe going to go NFLPA, and then he got the East-West kind of late, which was, obviously the East-West has always kind of been in the pecking order, at least in recent years, Senior Bowl, then East-West. So he took that opportunity. And honestly, I wrote an article, and this was no Notre Dame bias aside, because I always tell people that, like, I feel like I'm extra critical on Notre Dame players sometimes just because I watch them so frequently,
Sure,
and
absolutely.
He was the best quarterback out there, though, and that included guys like De'Ara King from Miami and Dustin Crum from Kent State and E.J. Perry from Brown, who ended up getting a combine invite as well. And I thought Jack Coan was the most consistent quarterback all week. First day, I felt that the timing was off a little bit, but the last couple days of practice, I thought that he was sharp. He was on time. He did everything that you would kind of quantify Jack Coan as being. So he had a nice bowl game. He had a nice showing in the game as well. So I thought that he really did do all the best for his stock down over there in Vegas. And he again parlayed that now into a combine invite. And combine invites for the player that Jack Coan is, in my opinion, is not quite as important when we're talking about a testing perspective. But again, the ability to throw in front of evaluators, to sit down into those interviews and be able to get on the board and show them how quick and intelligent he is as a football guy, that's going to be a lot more important for Jack Coan in Indianapolis than whether he runs 4.9 or 5.05. Like, it's not going to matter as much. It's about the mental capacity for a guy like Coan.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think especially quarterbacks, getting them into the room, getting them on the board, I think that's a huge piece of what the combine is. It's a lot of times it's the first opportunity for a lot of these teams and the personnel to talk to these guys, right? I mean, I think that could be really big for Jack Coan. And I would venture to say he's going to come off fairly well in those meetings, but I guess we shall see.
Yeah. Now, you would assume that, I mean, everything that you've heard and all the interviews that Jack Coan's ever done, he certainly comes off as a very bright and, honest individual. And I think teams are really going to love that. And I mean, I told Brian the other day, and everything I'm hearing, I truly believe this. I would be very surprised at this point if Jack Coan is not drafted, because I just think that there's just a solid projection for him, right? Like, he's never going to be a starting quarterback at the next level, but for a guy in the 5th, 6th, 7th round that you think could be the long-term solution as a backup, I think that there is a solid projection for Jack Coan with that. No star potential, but there's just consistency that can't be undersold in that spot.
So let's kind of break down what we'll kind of project a little bit with what he's going to do at the combine.
Mm-hmm.
What are the areas specifically for him do you think that he needs to shine in going into this thing?
I think anything testing wise is a bonus at this point, right? Like, it'd be nice if he had let's say some explosive numbers, like the 30+ inch vert, like that would be fine, because he's not going to win any races. Like, I don't expect him to run anything faster than probably like a 4.95 ish, somewhere in that ballpark. So that number doesn't matter as much. Some short area explosiveness stuff would be good just for that navigation in the pocket, right? You got to be quick twitch on your feet, all that type of stuff. But the most important part, aside from the meetings that we were talked about, is he's going to have the ability to throw. Right in front of all the evaluators. I want to see, just again, consistent on time, get the ball out fast, make, smart and just make sure that everything baseline is consistent from a footwork perspective. I feel like just him throwing and being there in front of them, all the evaluators, I think is the biggest thing for him, honestly. Not so much the 40 time or any of the testing stuff.
So you said that you think he's probably a day 3 guy. Right now going in, can he help himself into maybe a day 2, or do you think he's pretty much day 3? That's it right there.
I don't think you're taking Jack Coan on day 2 to be, just a pure backup guy. Like, if you're taking a quarterback on day 2, it's because there might be some baseline as a backup, but then like there might be potential to eventually develop into a starter. Maybe like that's kind of the projection you need for a guy like Jack Coan. I just don't see that potential to him. So I think he's probably late day 3, right? Like, you're going to draft him 5 through 7 rounds and see if he can, take a hold of a quarterback spot or maybe develop on a practice squad for a year. Like, that's that type of guy for me. He's not a guy that I don't think can rise to anywhere 2nd, 3rd round. Like, I just don't see that for him.
So on the other hand, though, can he play himself out of getting drafted? And if he does do that, because I always look at guys that are kind of at the end of the draft, and you're almost like you're better off not even getting drafted, because then you can pick your situation where you want to go, the best situation for you. So if he has, a subpar combine, can he fall out of getting drafted completely?
It's a great point, Vince. And also, it's the money difference isn't that incredible either, because I remember someone told me that I think it was so the first pick in the 7th round comparative to the top 25 players that were undrafted, the guaranteed money. Okay. 25 guys got paid more than the first round of the first pick of the 7th round. So sometimes financially it makes more sense. And then, like you said, you get to pick your destination, you get to pick the situation, which is big. I think I would be surprised if he falls in where he is at right now, because for him to fall, he just has to bomb those interviews, which I don't anticipate that happening. It's not like he's a guy that people perceive as this great athlete, and then he goes to the combine and he bombs testing. And you're like, oh wait, now I got to go reevaluate the film because he's not as good an athlete as I saw. He's a guy that's going to win with his mental capacity and his accuracy, right? Like, that's where the acumen's going to come from. So I just think that, like, barring him just bombing the interviews and all that type of stuff, I don't see where the slide happens for him.
Okay, all right. And I agree with you. And I think another part of his upside is just his demeanor, how he's just right down the middle. You're not going to get too high with him. You're not going to get too low with him. And I think when you're talking about the professional game, I think that can be a real bonus. I think that can be a real plus for teams.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, guys like Jim Sorgi and Tim Boyle and these guys that just claw into, Clipboard Jesus, like, these guys do it every single year, man. Like, and you just blink, and Chase Daniel's been in the league for 10 years and made, a
boatload of money.
A lot of money. It happens, man. Like, and hey, you need that consistency in that quarterback room, and you need a guy that just kind of understands what each day is supposed to look like, and you can depend on that guy to fulfill those requirements, right? So I think that's where Jack is, and I would not be shocked if you blink your eyes and 8 years from now, Jack Coan is a 7-8 year pro, just
Mhm.
clinging on to a spot. Like,
Yeah.
he's probably thrown less than 50 passes in his career, but he's made a ton of money doing it. So.
I could easily see that because I think he is, I don't even know if this is a knock, like if he'd be even happy that I said this, but he's reliable. Like he's just going to be that reliable guy that you can trust, that is going to be there every day, and he's going to do his job, and you can count on him. So
and there's a misnomer, Vince, honestly. Like people think, oh, day 3 a quarterback, I'm going to take this guy that has great tools and develop him. That rarely ever works out, man.
Right.
Usually the quarterbacks getting drafted late are usually the guys that have some type of perceived floor. Like guys that, like a Cole McDonald, for instance, out of Hawaii, was a guy that everyone loved. Oh, strong arm, is a good athlete. He didn't last in the NFL because the floor was just too much lower than where the ceiling was. Like you couldn't see the floor. For a guy like Jack, there's dependability there. Like you're saying, there's reliability. Like you can see it, and you don't want to waste a day 3 pick on a quarterback that is practice squad at best. Like you want a guy that maybe has that type of floor. So I think Jack's doing the best for himself. He took that momentum in the season, into the All-Star circuit, and then now I think that I think this is going to honestly be, I think he's already passed the biggest test. That from now on, it's just selling that he's a good young man who's, got a good head on his shoulders, which I think most people agree with about Jack Coan.
Yeah, you don't really hear any negative things about him off the field and all that. So no. I think you're absolutely right. So, Jack Coan, we'll call him a day 3 guy, but definitely going to get drafted. I should say definitely. I don't know what the heck's going to happen, but we think.
Yep.
Let's move on to a more intriguing prospect on the offensive side of the ball, and that's Kevin Austin. And I think we can all agree, and we've said it before, that he probably should have come back to school. I believe he received a go back to school grade. And that was, in my opinion, and I think, I don't want to speak for you, but I think we all think that that's probably what would have been best. But he has decided to go to the NFL draft, and he got an invitation to the combine, which I think is huge for him because I think he needs to make some waves here. So going into the combine, where he stands right now, where do you see Kevin Austin in the draft? Where does he stand?
I think he's going to get drafted late, probably 6th or 7th round as it stands, because I think that we're expecting a nice performance at the combine. We're expecting it. And, not to get too much into like what those numbers are, because I know we're going to cover that in a second, but he is a guy where his testing numbers are going to have to make up for a lot of the tape. To be honest
absolutely.
With you.
Yeah.
People are going to clamor towards the athletic upside, not towards the tape. Because, let's be honest, there is some inconsistencies from a ability to defeat press and remaining physical down the field and concentration drops. There is a lot of issues on film. So this performance in Indianapolis is either going to help people forget about some of those shortcomings on tape, or it's going to kind of just cement that, hey, maybe this guy isn't a draftable player because maybe the athletic upside isn't quite as high as we think it is.
Yeah, and I think that's the danger, right? I mean, it's kind of a boom or bust situation for Kevin Austin, I feel like, going into this thing.
Especially since he was a junior, right? So he didn't get a chance to go to the All-Star games. This is literally, I know he has the pro day, but people care much more about this combine because every player is in the same environment, same situation. There's none of that comfortability running on your own track and doing all that type of stuff.
Having your own guys to throwing you the ball and all of those different things. I mean, you might get matched up with Jack Coan, but you know what I'm saying. Yeah. Right.
No, it's exactly what it is, man. There's an uncomfortability to being in Indianapolis in the same situation as everybody else, and people take that measurements and all those testing so seriously because you're putting into a tough situation, and it's a sink or swim, honestly, for him. Because aside from that, you have the pro day opportunity, and then you have your visits with teams. That's all he has left. And I think someone just put that he was a senior, but so how the All-Star circuit works, because I think technically he was a redshirt junior, right? If I have that correct,
yes.
I might be wrong about that, but
no, he was a redshirt junior. He was a senior academically, yeah.
Yeah. So if you are not, so just so everybody knows, for the Senior Bowl and for the East-West Shrine Bowl, you are only allowed to participate if you are a graduated senior at that point. So if you're a guy, and I don't know if Austin graduated in December, but he would have had to been graduated in December to get an invite to that event. And those All-Star games are all passed. So he was not at any of the East-West Shrine or the Senior Bowl, even going down to, any of the lower bowls, even though I don't think he'd definitely not be eligible for those games. So, so he unfortunately did not have an opportunity to compete in an all-star circuit. So the testing is going to be the huge opportunity for him for sure.
So speaking of testing, some areas that you think that he really needs to excel in, whether it's a position drill, whether it's, 3-cone drill, whatever it happens to be, where do you think he needs to really shine?
Well, he's going to have to sell himself as a height, weight, speed guy. So I'm not as concerned about the I think that the short area numbers will be okay. I don't think they'll be fantastic. Like, I don't expect him to run a great 3-cone. I don't expect him to run a great 20-yard shuttle. Like, I just don't see that in his game. Because for me, he's more outside of numbers, long strider, vertical plane type of guy. So in those senses, 40 time would be great. Like, if he could run 4.4 high or 4.5 flat, that would be a nice time for him. But even more than that, I think explosiveness is kind of what his game says to me. So I'm thinking vertical jump, broad jump. Like, he needs, in my opinion, to have a high 30 vertical, like 38, 39, something to grab the attention. I mean, Miles Boykin a couple years ago had like a 43.5. I don't expect anything close to that, but for almost near 40 in the vert, 10 plus in the broad, he needs to have some nice, impressive numbers. Because I think of him kind of in between Miles Boykin and Javon McKinley over the last couple of years, right? Like, those guys are similar situations to a degree. They're late breakout guys. Miles Boykin tested like an elite athlete. Javon McKinley tested like a good athlete. Javon McKinley goes undrafted. Miles Boykin goes third round. I think of Kevin kind of in the middle there, like 5th, 6th round, if he tests the way I think he can. I don't think he's going to be nearly Miles, but I think that he is going to test like a very good athlete at his size.
Okay. So is that the highest you think he can go with? Let's say he just knocks it out of the park at the combine. Numbers are fantastic. Do you think is 5th round, you think the ceiling right now?
Yeah, I would say 5th round's probably the ceiling for what I'm expecting. Like, again, I'm thinking like 4.48, 4.50, somewhere in that ballpark for the 40, 38, 39 inches for a vert, and then 10.3 broad, right? Like somewhere in that ball. I think if he gets all that, that's going to be a very good numbers across the board for 6'2", 215 pounds with long arms. Like, that's going to be good. That's going to be check. Right. That'll get in the 5th round. If he exceeds those numbers, then we might be talking 4th round. Because, I mean, if he surprises me and he runs, let's say 4.42, and he has a 42-inch vert, and he really starts to put up some close to elite numbers, then the conversation changes a little bit. But I just think, perceived to what I believe are kind of the numbers looking at right now, I would say 5th round is a pretty solid destination.
Okay. All right. Can he play himself out of getting drafted? Same question that we talked about with Jack Coan. I mean, can he, Absolutely. If he just goes there and just bombs or gets injured, for example, I mean, and doesn't even have an opportunity to compete? I mean, of course, I'm not wishing that on him, but we know how badly he needs this combine.
Yeah. If Kevin Austin goes there, and again, he is using this athletic testing as I don't want to say an apology, but like, you're trying to make people forget about the film to a degree at some points, right? Like the shortcomings on film that he had. And again, he's only a 1-year starter. So like, there are some things that people understand, but he needs a great testing day. So if he goes there and he runs 4.6 flat and has like a 33-inch vert, then people are just going to be like, you're an athletic upside guy and you didn't test like an athletic guy. So that at that point, we're not going to take a shot, because it's not, I mean, there's just going to be other guys that are going to test a lot better that they're going to take a chance on, because how it works on day 3, especially, like, you're going to have some guys that are relatively graded the same, but you're always going to take the guy that tested like a better athlete. You're always going to take the perceived higher upside at those spots, because that height, weight, speed is what ultimately sends.
Makes a lot of sense. So again, and if he does have a poor combine, he obviously still has the pro day.
Sure.
Has an opportunity to fix it, but I think at that point you're hanging on by a thread, right?
Yeah. And it's, again, like, in a more comfortable situation, I would expect guys to test a lot better. Like, that's very understood. But I think the combine is the biggest test for him. I think that the pro day can forgive some parts of it, but if he wants to be a draftable player somewhere on day 3 as a developmental player, he really needs to kill it in Indianapolis.
Absolutely. So let's move on to our last offensive player, and that would be another young man who is leaving school a little bit early, and that is Kyron Williams. And Kyron Williams, obviously, the running back position is just it's an interesting one for me just because of where these guys are getting drafted and kind of the value that NFL teams put on running backs these days.
Yeah.
Where does he stand right now going into the combine? Because I think I've heard, third round ceiling right now for him.
I see him a lot higher than that, to be honest with you. I think he's in the conversation for the first running back off the board, because I think of it similarly to a couple years ago when Jonathan Taylor and DeAndre Swift and all those guys came out, right? The first running back off the board that year was Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who was a smaller, powerful dude who caught the football maybe more consistently than a Jonathan Taylor. And although it was a bad pick now, that always happens. People want that all-around profile that kind of rises up boards a little bit. So I think that the profile that Kyron Williams has is the perfect for a riser assumed. I would say more third, fourth round is a little bit of the floor for me. Like I think that he good. I think that he can fight his way into the early second round conversation and potentially be the first running back off the board if he tests well, because I think that when you're talking about the pass blocking perspective, you're talking about the route running perspective, the hands, like all around profile, he does everything really well. So I think a lot of teams are really going to value that profile, I think.
No, absolutely. And so where I agree with you, he checks a lot of boxes, right? And he's I've heard knocks on him that he's kind of a jack of all trades, master of none, kind of a back. That's not what I think, but
I got it.
You know where I'm coming from here. So what are NFL teams who are in the market for a running back? What are they looking for from Kyron Williams during the combine?
So I think anything lower body explosive stuff is going to be big for him, and then the short area stuff. 40 time. It matters to a degree, but I mean, I don't think anybody watches Kyron Williams and says like he's a home run hitter. Like it's not like Jonathan Taylor where you're like, okay, he needs to run fast because he's breaking all these big runs at Wisconsin. Kyron Williams is more a short area explosive guy. So
Agreed.
As long as he runs somewhere in the 4.5s, like even if it's like 4.57, it's forgivable. Like it's not a big deal. I mean, like I said, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire ran like 4.62. So like he's not fast, but having again mid to high vertical, somewhere 36 to 38 would be fantastic for that low body explosion. 10 plus broad would be fantastic. And then I think the short area stuff is important. Like the short shuttle, you want to get anywhere, sub 4 seconds if you can in that short shuttle. And then, if we're talking 3 cone, sub 7 in the 3 cone would be a nice number for Kyron Williams. So somewhere in those short area explosive stuff, I think is where it really parlays. And then like when we get to the position drills, let's see him be consistent as a pass catcher.
Absolutely.
And, do all those types of things because it's a little tough. Obviously he can't show off the blocking prowess as much, hitting bags and all that good stuff, but he can show his flexibility, he can show his hands, and he can show his comfort as a receiver.
Well, and blocking, I mean, that's where the film comes in, right? I mean, that's if you're because you can't really simulate a whole lot of, blitz pickups and all of those different things at the combine. So that's where the film, I think, will really help Kyron Williams.
Oh, for sure. And he is the best pass blocker, in my opinion, in this year's running back class. I mean, he has if you just want to watch highlights, man, like him against Clemson and I mean, just dogging these really good linebackers and every single week. I mean, against Wisconsin, I'm a big Leo Chenal fan from Wisconsin this year that came out of Wisconsin. Like he put Chenal on his back as a 260-pound linebacker. Like he is a fantastic pass blocker, man. So I don't think anybody has any concerns about that. They have no concerns about the ability as a pass catcher. I think just, showing that he's a short area explosive guy. And then one other thing I forgot to mention is like he coming in over 200 pounds would be big for him. It would be huge because if he's sub 200, people are going to pencil him as like, you're just a third down specialist. You're just Duke Johnson. You're just, the kid, Gio Bernard that came out of North Carolina a few years. Like that's the peak of what you are. If he's over 200 pounds, so like, let's say he comes in at 204, 205 at 5'8" and some change, whatever he is. And then he's kind of packed well together, which he is on film.
Sure.
If he's 200 plus, I think that just kind of changes the perspective of how his usage could be at the next level.
So I know that you dive into this stuff, and so you are well versed. So who is the competition for Kyron Williams as far as the running back board?
It's Breece Hall from Iowa State's one for sure. He's had a couple nice seasons, obviously for Iowa State. 6 foot, 215 pounds. Isaiah Spiller from Texas A&M's in a similar mold. 6 foot, 220 pounds. Short area explosive. Kenneth Walker from Michigan State, transfer from Wake Forest. Yeah, they're similar size profiles, I think Walker has a couple pounds on him, but he's also like 5'8", 5'9", 205, somewhere in that ballpark. So he's another guy. And then, the Georgia guys have a couple guys, Amir White and James Cook. But I would say that the top right now of the class would definitely be Walker, Hall, and Spiller from Texas A&M in whatever order that you want to put those guys in.
Okay. And then I hate ending these with on the negative side, but if he does have a poor combine, what do you think that does to his draft stock?
I think he's still an early day 3 type of kid, like fourth, maybe into like the late 4th round, because again, the pass blocking and the pass receiving, like there's always going to be a niche for that role. So if he comes in at the combine and he's like 193 pounds, let's say, and he tests like a below average athlete, then there might be some limited upside to how much of a volume getter he can be. But I still think that with the niche that he has in pass protection and as a pass receiver, I would be a little surprised if he falls too far, just because I think that the teams are always going to value that type of player.
Well, and I also think, going back to the film, I mean, let's say he does have a poor combine. This is where film helps you, in my opinion, for him. I mean, he shows his explosion. He shows the different things that you were looking for from the combine. And, also from a pass blocking standpoint, a blitz pickup, all that fun stuff. So I think that's where film helps him, as opposed to when we were talking about Kevin Austin, where you're kind of trying to make guys forget about some of the inconsistencies on film. I think the film helps Kyron Williams.
No, it does. And kind of how it works is, at this point, everyone's, well, I shouldn't say everyone at this point has done it yet, but by the combine time, for the most part, people will have their homework done on Kyron Williams from a scout perspective, from an evaluator perspective. At that point, what the combine really is, it's a verification, right? Like a guy, you think a guy's fast on film, he runs fast, check. If a guy is fast on film, he runs slow, maybe we need to go take a second look, right? Like that's just where that verification process comes more than anything. I don't think that this is, obviously it's not the first time that people are going to be well aware of Kyron Williams. It's just going to be another box checked if he shows that he is the short area explosive and comfortable in the passing game like people think he is on film.
That's a really good point, because that's the way a lot of teams view the combine. It's a verification of what you think you already know, unless you're the Raiders, and then they just pick the fastest guy there, right? So
or Alex Leatherwood, yeah.
Right, exactly. So let's jump over to the other side of the football. 2 guys from Notre Dame got the call to come to the combine. Let's start with the most obvious one, Kyle Hamilton. I mean, obviously he has the biggest upside of anybody that's in the draft for Notre Dame. People are saying top 5, top 10, whatever. Where do you have Kyle Hamilton?
It sounds so silly, but I would be shocked if he fell in the top 10. Like, absolutely shocked, man.
Yeah.
I mean, every time I talk about it, it's just he is literally like a generational type talent.
He's a unicorn, right? I mean, he's just different than everybody that's out there.
He absolutely is. And everybody always throws out the generational term way too much. And I actually just talked about this yesterday. Kyle Hamilton's the only guy in 2022 that has the argument to being a generational player, though, because guys just 6'4", 220 that run like him just don't come around at the safety position. Like, if you're talking historically as comparisons, you're talking about guys like Steve Atwater and Kenny Easley and Sean Taylor and like those types of guys. You're not like, you can't find guys. They don't come out every few years, like they come out every once in a blue moon. It's a rare thing to see. And then you flip on the Florida State film and he's on the opposite hash and he works all the way back sideline as a deep defender. You're just like, that's not typical stuff. Like, usually those guys are playing closer to the line of scrimmage, not away from the line of scrimmage. So
exactly.
I think that, he's been a little bit of an out of sight, out of mind to a degree, because he obviously missed the latter part of the season. And people just haven't maybe talked about him enough from the perspective of just down the stretch of the season. But again, would be shocked after everything that's going on if he doesn't go top 10. I think he has a legitimate upside to go top 3 or 4 if he has a huge combine. I think it's very possible.
So you again, I will repeat myself that you're in this, right? So the top 10, Jacksonville, Detroit, Houston, the Jets, the Giants, Carolina, would have been Chicago, but now it's the Giants. That could have been great. Atlanta, Denver, and then the Jets again. Where do you think, from a need standpoint, that Kyle Hamilton may or may not land?
I mean, I could argue, and again, a safety's not going to go first overall, but I could make an argument that he's the best player in this draft. So, I mean, if Jacksonville sat there number one and said, we got Trevor Lawrence already, let's get the best player on the board, you could perceive that. I just saw someone say number 2 to Detroit. Yes, makes sense. The Jets are in the top 5, and I know they might have PSTD from Jamal Adams a few years ago, but kid's a special football player. So I think that there's plenty of spots in that top 10 that make a ton of sense. The New York Giants make sense.
They got 2 in the top 7. I mean,
yeah, this type of player, man, they just don't come around very often. So especially if a team is sitting there and telling themselves we want to go BPA, we want to go best player available, we don't want to mess around with some huge projection.
And sometimes you do that in the top 5, right? I mean, unless you have a glaring need, best player available is not a bad way to go if you're sitting in the top 5, right?
Right. No, it's
got holes.
Not,
if you're in the top 5, you got holes, man.
Yes, yeah. Hey, man, Jacksonville, Jets, Giants, there are holes everywhere. So taking the best player available is never a bad idea when you just need good football players. You need an inflection of talent into your organization. So, I think Kyle, top 10, I think it's a slam dunk. Top 5, I think is very possible.
Okay, so let me flip the question a little bit. Where do you think is the best landing spot for Kyle that's in the top 10?
Where do I think is the best landing spot for Kyle? Oh, that's a little bit of a different layer.
Yeah.
I would say
it's harder to project all these other guys because you're talking 3rd, 4th, round, and who knows what's going to happen down there. So it's more fun to kind of do it when you know he's going to be a top 10 player.
Yeah, I mean, I think that luckily for a player like Kyle, he could fit into just about any system, right? Because there's no team that doesn't need a Kyle Hamilton. If you had that type of player, I think you would be well versed. But I do think that, I still have hope for what the Jets are trying to do with Robert Saleh. I think he's a good coach, and I think that you saw when he was with the 49ers, they had Jimmy Ward and they had Jaquiski Tart to back at safety, and they were very different stylistic players, but I think that they got the most out of those type of guys. So I think the Jets makes a ton of sense. Honestly, I think that Kyle can make any situation good, though, to be honest with you, because I think that, again, if he's a generational talent that I think he is, those types of guys usually find a way to make it work.
No, absolutely. Yeah, no question about that. Do you think anybody would trade up to get Kyle Hamilton?
Nah, nobody's ever going to trade up to take a safety. It's not going to happen.
I figured I'd ask.
No, it's a great question. I mean, usually you're trading up for a quarterback in the top 10. That is the obvious one. It's not a great quarterback class. So you can tell me that maybe somebody jumps up for one of these defensive ends we have at the top, maybe an offensive tackle if you like Evan Neal or Makwanu out of NC State. You can sell me on that, but there's no way that somebody could justify, I don't think, trading up for a safety in the top 10. It's just not the high value position that maybe it once was.
Right. Do we know, and I'm kind of putting you on the spot on this one. Do we know that Kyle is going to participate in everything at the combine?
As far as I know he's out in California, I believe at Exos, if I remember correctly, and he's training. So I would assume, I know that he was in a good enough state injury-wise to potentially play in the bowl game if he made that decision, right? If Notre Dame would have made a playoff run, then he would have been okay to test or to play, I mean. So to my understanding, he is working out to test, and I expect him to be a full participant as far as I know, yeah.
All right. Well, that's good news.
Mm-hmm.
Does a bad combine – or let's go positive. So where do you think he needs to shine, or does he even need to shine based on where everybody thinks that Kyle Hamilton is at this point?
I think from an evaluation perspective, he doesn't need to shine as much because people see the freaky stuff that he does on film. From a media perspective, maybe he needs to pop a little bit just because they haven't seen him, in a little bit, just from a playing perspective. But ultimately, media doesn't make the decision. That's just more for, our curiosity. But I envision Kyle at 6'3" plus 215 to 220 pounds, somewhere in that ballpark. I anticipate him testing like an all-timer, to be honest, 4'4" something at that size, high 30s. If he got to 40 inches, I'd be like, yep, makes sense. 10 plus broad, makes sense. I think the short area stuff's going to be better than people anticipate too, because I've seen some reps of him in the slot playing man where I'm like, Duke can change direction for a bigger guy. So I think just all the way across the board, he's gonna test like a freak, and that's just gonna continue to kind of just cement what people think about him.
Yeah. And I'll ask it because it's on the list to ask. But if he bombs the combine for some odd reason, what is the floor for Kyle Hamilton at this point?
I mean, I guess he could fall slightly 15? Out of the top 10. I mean, what's a bad 40 time for Kyle Hamilton? Maybe like 4.5, 5? Like the kid's a freak, man. Like I don't anticipate there being a high variance in how he tests. Like for me, he's an absolute freak on film. So it's hard to even imagine him not testing well in some capacity. Like I think that he's very safe in the top 10, in my opinion. If he falls to 15, if he runs 4.55 and has like a 35-inch vert comparative to like a 37, 38, 39, somewhere in that ball, I guess it's possible. But I think that a fall would be more about people overthinking the value of the safety position than actually what the performance is.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
All right. The second guy on the defensive side of the ball, Myron Tagovailoa-Amosa, got the invite, and the only big man from Notre Dame to get an invite. So the only non-skill guy. So the conversation will be a little bit different here. First of all, where do you see MTA at this point going into the draft?
Well, he had another nice week at the East-West Shrine. He was out there with Coan, and I thought that he did some really nice things all week, both working inside and out. On some, there was some ability for him in pass rush reps to work inside is almost like a 3 tech, and to work outside in a more traditional like 5 type of look. So I think that he is a guy right now that I would say late rounds, like 7th round draftable type of player, 6th round potentially into a UDFA. I think there's a little variance on his projection just because I think that testing is going to be huge for Myron.
Okay.
Kind of like Kevin, because he's in that tweener role, right? Like he's played defensive tackle at Notre Dame the majority, then he played defensive end for one. He's not like doesn't have incredible length or anything, so he's a little bit of an odd framed defensive end. I think he kind of needs to show that he has some traits to play full time on defensive end, because otherwise he's a 6'2", 260-pound interior defensive lineman right now that maybe can't hold substantial amount of weight, because I know he played at like 285 at some points, but
it was a struggle to get there. Like it was a struggle for him to hold on to that weight, which is why the switch to defensive end at Notre Dame made a lot of sense. But does that make sense moving on to the next level?
Yeah, that's where the conversation happens, and I think that testing really is going to be vital for him, because if he goes at 6'2", 260 something, and he runs like, let's say he runs close to a 5 flat, like a 4.9 something, and he verticals 30 inches, 32 inches, somewhere in that ballpark, then those questions are going to get amplified. Like, is he a full-time edge at the next level? What can he do for us? Because then it's just because I keep kind of reiterating on this kind of thought process, and I even wrote it in an article recently. Like, there's a big difference between a player that's a hybrid player and there's a difference between a player that's a tweener, right? Like hybrids can excel at multiple things. Like he's a defensive end, but then he can switch inside a defensive tackle and he can affect, for multiple alignments. But then there's tweeners who they doesn't really fit the defensive end molds, and then he's a little small to play D tackle. Like, what is he? So I think if he tests poorly, teams are not going to have that just recurring issue in their mind of, I don't know where he fits. Is he a good football player? Yeah. Did he play a lot of football at Notre Dame? Yes. Like, those are box checked, but like, how does he project to the next level? What position? So I think that testing is going to be huge for him. Like mid-30s vert would be fantastic. Running it 4.7 something. Like, I'm not even asking for anything freaky. Like 4.78, I would be like, check. 4.8 flat even. I'd be like, check. That's cool. Because then I could sell you're a base defensive end, that on third downs and pass situations, then I can move you inside and let you rush from multiple alignments. Like I think that's what he really needs to do in Indianapolis.
Okay, that makes sense. So if he does those things, is he 6'7" still, or does he jump up a little bit?
You could sell me that he maybe moves to a 5th round if he has a really great showing, right? Like I don't think that the production and still the body doesn't really back up him being much higher than that, because again, he's still a very, very unique body type playing on the edge. He's not he doesn't have a ton of length. He's not the physically impressive type of guy, but he could, I think, be a guy that's just very solid and dependable and can play in the run game and can give you potentially some stuff working inside. Like, I think that's kind of the upside for him. You could sell me on 5th round, but I think it's probably more 6th to 7th if everything goes well.
Okay. And then, I mean, you already said that right now he's kind of projecting as like a low 6, maybe 7, even an undrafted free agent. So if he doesn't check those boxes at the combine, are we talking undrafted free agent? Which, again, as we talked about with some other guys, that's not necessarily a terrible place to be potentially, but does he fall out of the draft completely?
Yeah, it's very possible. He definitely could be a PFA if things don't go as well. Again, if he's like a 5'9", 32-inch vert and just the short area stuff is just very ordinary, at that point you're like, again, 260-something pounds, that really, is he going to play at defensive end on the edge a ton? Because like those guys have to play in increased space. You know, you get to that tweener label, and I think that's really going to hurt his projection, right? Because then there's also the layer of like in an even versus an odd man front, an even front, like maybe you could fight with that body type a little bit, but like an odd front, you're talking about guys that need length up front and then outside linebackers who need to play in space a ton. So there's even some scheme dependency at that point too. So I do think that he needs to test well in order to get drafted. Yes. Okay.
Let's talk about real quick some of the guys that did not get an invite to the combine. I guess notably Kurt Hinish, Kane Madden. Do those sound like the two that are the biggest, not snubs, that's not the right word, but that didn't get the invite that are available?
Yeah, I would say Drew White too. Put him in that conversation. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you're asking me who my biggest snub, I would say the one that surprised me the most, honestly, was Drew White, even though he didn't have a great year, because he was a multi-year 80+ tackle guy for Notre Dame, started a lot of games at Mike, was just kind of a consistent player for a couple of years. And again, I know he battled injuries and his tackle total was low this year, but I kind of thought that he might sneak an invite in. Kurt Hinish, on the other hand, he's like a very dependable football player, tough football player,
right? I mean, is that the issue with him being an inside player like that?
Yeah, it just lacks traits, and he doesn't have anything on third downs where you're like, okay, he can give us something against the pass. He's a very one-note nose tackle who's only like 295 pounds, so there's just some limitations to him. And then Caden Madden just didn't have a great year for Notre Dame. I was slightly surprised just because I think that the perception of him is a little different than maybe what we saw at Notre Dame. Like, again, he was an All-American at Marshall, and obviously he was a very, he had a nice little resume at Marshall. So if he would have snuck an invite, I would not have been shocked. But I would say that Drew White was probably the most surprising guy that I expected to maybe get an invite to Indianapolis.
Do you, of all the guys that are available for Notre Dame that are available for the draft, do you feel like the 5 guys that got invites plus those 3 of that group, that's 8, right? So of that group, how many do you foresee actually getting drafted?
Assuming everything goes well, or at least to what my expectations are, I would say we have Kyle, obviously high first round pick. Kyron Williams, somewhere second round, I think is kind of the ceiling with him. Kevin Austin, I think, gets a late round flyer because he has that upside. I think Myron, as long as he tests well, has upside to get drafted. He's kind of the borderline guy for me. And then I am missing one guy, Jack Coan. Jack Coan, I think, is a slam dunk to get drafted. So I'm saying four guys are definitely going to get drafted. And then if Myron tests well, I think he's the 5th guy to get drafted. Yeah.
You think those other 3 guys are going to be undrafted free agents most likely? Because it seems like a lot of guys get signed to be an undrafted free agent.
Yeah, if Drew White had a little more length and a little more just like raw athleticism, I would say maybe he sneaks out a 7th round selection. But right now, I think those guys are probably all UDFAs and guys that will definitely get taken into camps like Kurt Hinish and Drew White and Cade Madden. They'll all be in a camp. They'll all be signed as priority free agents. There's no doubt about that. I just think that they kind of have an uphill battle because one thing that we didn't even talk about is the fact that with the COVID year impacting everything, a lot of kids went back to school, and this is a very deep draft. I don't think it's as top heavy as some years, but there is guys that are going to be drafted that have legitimate draftable grades from teams this year. There's going to be guys drafted in the 4th round that teams maybe had day 2 grades on. There's going to be guys drafted in, the third round that had high second round grades. Like, I think there's a lot of that just pushback that's going to happen just because of the depth. So unfortunately, some guys I think are just going to be kind of on the outside looking in.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. Do we want, is there anything we missed? First of all, I'm going to throw it into your lap here. Is there anything we missed with any of these guys that you want to talk about?
Now, I mean, again, I think that the battle for running back 1 is my biggest headline, honestly. Like, I really, because I think that some people are underselling who Kyron Williams is, because I know that he might not come in the biggest package in the world, right? But like, he is, 5'9", 200 pounds. So he's not like the most physically impressive running back from a, height and size perspective, but he is just a guy that checks a lot of boxes. And I think that he has an argument that in a class that has guys like Breece Hall, who's talented, and Isaiah Spiller, who's talented, and Kenneth Walker, that's talented, I think Kyron potentially could unseat one of those guys as the first running back off the board, because I think the all-around profile, again, is why, and it may have been wrong, and it was wrong, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire went over guys like Jonathan Taylor and DeAndre Swift. People always are going to value that overall, well-roundedness to a game. So that's just, I think that's the biggest headline, and just, it's going to be exciting just to see Kyle Hamilton finally back at work after missing the last few games. Like, he's an exciting football player, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the type of numbers that he puts up.
We haven't seen him in months, and I feel like we got gypped out of the second half of the season with him not being around. I mean, because we all knew it was his last year at Notre Dame. I mean, that was not a big surprise, right? It's just like with Michael Mayer, right? We got gypped out of half the season with him, right? And it's like one more chance to see him compete with Notre Dame, kind of, not on his chest, but you know what I mean. He's still a Notre Dame guy for another few months until he takes that moniker as an NFL player. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what Kyle Hamilton can do as well. And I'm not usually as dialed into the combine, obviously as you are, but just in general, I know people love the combine, but I'm actually excited to see what Kevin Austin can do. Can he help himself out? I still think he should have come back, but I want what's best for him, so I hope he can help himself out. See Kyle Hamilton just dominating people, and just to see the drool coming off of like coaches' mouths, as they watch Kyle Hamilton go through drills, wishing that they had an opportunity to get him. And like you said, I think Kyron Williams has an opportunity to really surprise some people. And maybe it won't even be at the combine. Maybe he needs to get onto a team and then gets onto the field. But once he gets an opportunity on the field, I think whoever ends up with Kyron Williams on their roster is going to be absolutely ecstatic to have him around, because he's a playmaker. He's a playmaker. Yeah.
Well, I'll say 2 years ago, I actually got to go to Indianapolis to cover the combine, which was pretty awesome. Last year, of course, it was canceled due to everything. Yeah. So it's just going to be nice to finally get that back, because the one evaluation pitfall that happened last year was with no verified numbers at the combine, you were dependent just so much on just the pro day stuff, right? So it was a little difficult from an evaluation perspective to trust some of these numbers, because everyone's running 4.3 now at these pro days instead of what their actual time is, which is awesome. And it's also going to be nice just to see, Charlie Casserly, with his eyes closed, clocking the 40. If people don't know what I'm talking about, please Google Charlie Casserly combine right now and you'll see, but it's awesome.
Oh, fantastic. All right. Well, that is going to do it for this edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. And we're going to be back tomorrow. And I believe, I'll let you set this up, but I believe we've got a special show at noon. Is that accurate?
Yep. Me and Brian will be there at noon o'clock. I almost we'll be there at noon. We'll be there at 12 o'clock. Break it down. The Preston Zinter out of Central Catholic in Massachusetts. He is making his decision live on CBS. So we'll be streaming that. And then we'll be talking about the class impact on whether he chooses the Irish or not, both positively or negatively if he does not choose the Irish. So we'll be doing a live, immediate impact on what that commitment or non-commitment can look like for the Irish.
And then we will move right into the mailbag after that, depending on how long your guys' breakdown takes. But we'll move into the mailbag after that. So a lot of good stuff coming tomorrow. So make sure you tune in and hit that notification bell so because a lot of people aren't going to realize that we're coming on early tomorrow at noon. And so make sure you check that out, like, subscribe, all of that fun stuff. So For Ryan Roberts, our director of recruiting, I'm Vince D'Addario, and we will talk to you tomorrow at high noon, everybody.